So what have I told you that there were bands in the 60s and 70s that could eclipse the biggest names in rock? But something went wrong. These stories are real. These songs still shred, and these 10 bands, well, they're just criminally underrated. Let's dive in and give them the spotlight that they've always deserved. Coming out of Minneapolis in the mid-1960s, this first band are called The Litter, who were a raw, explosive garage rock band whose snarling energy would later be echoed in punk and grunge. Their debut single, Action Woman, has all the swagger and bite of early Kinks or Yardbirds, but with a Midwestern twist. Grittier, less polished, more primal. They were part of a growing underground scene that never really quite made up the national leap. And despite unparalleled regional radio play and a reputation for sweat-drenched live sets, they just simply couldn't break through commercially. Critics often pointed to their ill-fitting name, their underwhelming distribution and lack of touring infrastructure as the key reasons. But revisit their records now and it's all there. Fuzzed-out guitars, snarling vocals and that urgent adolescent hunger that powered 1,000 garage bands after them. Somebody help me now. Won't somebody tell me what I've done wrong? Now, band 2 are Skaldoni, who were one of Poland's best-kept musical secrets. Formed in the late 1960s, this Krakow-based band managed to weave together elements of Western progressive rock, Slavic folk melodies and Baroque orchestration, all under the watchful eye of a communist government that was deeply suspicious of decadent Western music, unquote. But despite those political barriers, Skaldoni created lush, layered soundscapes that really rival contemporaries like Camel or Gentle Giant, for argument. Now, their ability to integrate Polish poetry, symphonic structures and experimental jazz into the rock idiom was really nothing short of visionary. Their music had a warmth and a complexity that felt deeply personal, not just prog for prog's sake, but storytelling through sound. But because their work wasn't widely exported, they became legends within Eastern Europe, but really rarely reached Western listeners. Yet their catalogue, now reissued in recent years, reveals a band that was decades ahead of the time. They were blending cultures and sounds into something utterly their own. Now, for the third band today, don't let a whimsical name fool you, as Fuzzy Duck were a powerhouse of early 70s British hard rock with progressive leanings. Their self-titled debut and only album is a holy grail for collectors and a head trip for headphone listeners. Time Will Be Your Doctor kicks off the record with muscular riffs, a galloping bass lines and scorching Hammond organ licks that really suggest they could have rivaled Deep Purple if given the right support. Time will be your doctor, soon the pain will all be. Guitarist Mick Hawksworth, previously of 5 Day Week and Straw People, brought grit and psychedelic flair, while drummer Paul Francis laid down fat, swinging grooves that prefigured stoner rock. The band had everything going for them musically: tight arrangements, killer tone, and really a sense of drama. But internal instability and a lack of label backing doomed them to obscurity. Still, the record holds up brilliantly, and it really feels like a snapshot of a parallel timeline where Fuzzy Duck became a festival staple. Now, one of the more tragic what-if stories in British rock affected the fourth band today, called Fantasy, who crafted a single studio album only, Paint a Picture, and it's so achingly beautiful it's hard to believe it didn't receive more attention. With mellotron-drenched textures, lifty guitar lines and emotionally resonant lyrics, Fantasy straddled the line between progressive rock and baroque pop. Think of them in terms of what would happen if the Moody Blues jammed with Genesis, but with a softer, more introspective voice. All fears aside, I think of you. Tracks like Paint a Picture and Circus show a band unafraid to slow things down and explore the emotional undercurrent of adolescence, love and memory. But unfortunately, they emerged just as the music industry had begun pivoting away from ornate compositions and towards much punchier, more commercial fare. The band disbanded shortly after their debut, but the record lives on, especially in collector circles and among fans of melancholic, melodic prog. And it's a lost treasure. And before joining Yes and later the Moody Blues, Swiss keyboardist Patrick Moraz was experimenting with wild time signatures, electric violin and fusion textures in the fifth band I'm looking at today called Main Horse. Now their lone album is a fever dream of Euro prog sensibility, with sprawling instrumental passages that could really give King Crimson a run for their money. Pale Sky is a standalone, a shifting 11-minute journey through eerie chords, galloping bass and frenetic keyboard solos. Main Horse were ambitious, possibly too ambitious. Without strong vocals or a radio-ready single, they struggled to connect with the mass audience. But in hindsight, that's part of their appeal. They were just true explorers, uninterested in compromise. Now, Moraz would later refine his sound with Yes on Relayer, but Main Horse remains a crucial footnote in his story and in the evolution of continental progressive rock. Now, I throw you a curveball for the sixth band, and though they technically hail from the late 1990s and perhaps early 2000s, Tarantula Hawk embodied the unfiltered experimentalism of 70s prog and psychedelic in a modern context. Now, hailing from San Diego, their instrumental compositions unfolded like post-rock symphonies, moving from ambient minimalism to crushing doom and then back again. Their eponymous debut album is less a collection of songs and much more of a sonic voyage. Each track is a chapter in a larger hypnotic narrative. Think Pink Floyd's Echoes meets early Neurosis. They used analog synths, unorthodox percussion and feedback-laden guitar passages really to conjure up mood and menace. And while they're technically outside of the era, yes, I know that, their aesthetic lineage traces directly back to the likes of Van de Graaff Generator or Can, bands that push boundaries and let atmosphere lead the way. They're a reminder that the spirit of 70s experimentation is still alive in hidden corners of the modern underground. Now, one of the great lost bands of the American underground is the seventh group today, Courtyard Music Group, who barely seem to exist, and yet their sound remains hauntingly relevant. These guys came from Ohio, where they recorded a single acetate demo in the late 1960s, but since become a spectacular collector's legend. Now, their music falls somewhere between the ethereal dream folk of United States of America with the gentle psychedelia of early Love. Sparse arrangements, minor key vocals, and a lo-fi charm give their work a haunting sense of isolation and honesty. But what most painful is what they could have been. Had they been discovered by a label like Elektra or ESP Disc, they might have had the opportunity to grow into something iconic. But instead they remained a ghost band, a whisper of a time when music was raw, personal and filled with unknowable potential. Look for their music on YouTube and be careful not to put "the" at the start, as that's an entirely different band. Now, not to be confused with the late 80s glam band, the eighth band today is Spread Eagle from UK, where a thunderous riff-heavy outfit merged early metal intensity with blues rock swagger. Now, their self-titled album is pure hard rock grit. It's the kind that filled pub backrooms and sweat-soaked clubs across England in the early 70s. Nighttime Rider is the centerpiece. It's a relentless rocker built on a thick bass, snarling vocals, and a rhythm section that hits like a freight train. Had they been picked up by a major like Atlantic or Vertigo, they really might have followed the path of free or humble pie. But instead, they remain an obscure curiosity, beloved by collectors and celebrated by hard rock archaeologists, but unknown really to the wider public. They're the kind of band that really makes crate digging really worth the effort. Now, long before Sebastian Bach screamed his way through MTV, the name Skid Row, the ninth band today, belonged to an Irish blues rock trio featuring a teenage Gary Moore on guitar, no less. Their sound was raw, fluid and aggressive, mixing Cream-style riffage with jazz inflection and fiery solos. Mad Dog Woman is Moore's early calling card. This one's a hard, driving track full of attitude and frighteningly advanced technique for someone barely out of high school. Skid Row were immensely respected in Ireland and opened for major acts, but couldn't really quite lock down an international breakthrough for themselves. Their story is a familiar one. Great talent, flashes of brilliance, but not the infrastructure or luck to go global. Yet they still deserve recognition as the band that launched one of the great guitarists of this generation. Now, before there was Yes, there was a band called Mabel Greer's Toy Shop, the last in today's list today, and a mouthful of a name for a band that really laid the foundation for one of prog's most enduring acts, featuring Chris Squire, Peter Banks, and eventually John Anderson. Their blend of jazz-influenced rock, classical motifs and Dada-esque lyrics became the genesis of Yes's sound. Beyond and Before, which would be recorded for Yes's debut album, was a key track for them here. It combined heavy bass lines with trippy melodies and showed the band's early interest in structure and dynamics, qualities that would define classic Yes as we know all too well. The Toy Shop name was dropped, but their DNA runs through everything that followed. And revisiting these early recordings feels like opening a time capsule and watching prog rock just state. Now, each of these bands represents a path not taken, a creative fork in the road that could have led to something massive, but instead really ended in silence. But it was in that silence that there's value. These acts remind us that musical greatness isn't always rewarded with fame, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the most rewarding discoveries are the ones you make yourself. Today's algorithm-driven culture favours what is trending, but if you dig deeper, there's an entire hidden universe of lost rock legends waiting to be rediscovered, bands that really burned bright for a moment and then faded, but left behind echoes that really still resonate. Now it's your turn. Did you already know of these bands? Did any of them surprise you? Or do you have a favourite lost legend of your own that the world forgot that I hadn't included? Now let me know in the comments. I read them all and you know, and I love hearing about the deep cuts that I may have missed. Now I have created a playlist where I can for some of the tracks featured today on Amazon Music. Now others will need to be found on YouTube. Link in the description for the playlist for these videos. Now, if you love discovering bands that history forgot, hit the like button and maybe even share this with someone who still keeps their vinyl alphabetized. Also in the descriptions are details to my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can support the work the channel does in producing these videos. Now, this is the 6th video, I think, in the series where you guys have suggested bands for me to feature in a Bands I Bet You Don't Know. Now, the first of those was really an outlier video for me, and that's the one I want you to watch next. I'm going to see you over there.